Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Goedemorgen iedereen. Welcome at the Kunsthal. We're going to do this masterclass in English, of course, since Michael isn't really that well in Dutch. Today we are very honored to have Michael Kvium here in the Kunsthal to give you all a masterclass. Related, of course, to the show we have from Kvium, Circus Europa, which is actually, showing us about the current state of Europe, or maybe even the world. And we're going to talk about that actually today, not like the state in the world, but what does art have to do with it? In what way would an artist have to relate himself or herself to the situation in the world, but also what does it mean if you're a student and planning on having an art practice of yourself, a professional one. First we're going to talk about that. Then there's a moment where we can have a Q&A, so if you have any questions, please ask them. If you do have a question, I'm going to ask right now, and I'm going to ask again, I think later, to go and stand up, say your name, which school you are, and then ask your question. And I was talking about this current state of the world, which is quite, chaotic, I'd say. And at least you have one answer concerning the topic fake news, for example. And I quote, "Fake news is art too." And I think that's maybe a good start point to give the word to you, Michael.
Thank you, and thank you for coming. Am I on? Yeah. Okay, thank you, and thank you for coming. And yes, art is a kind of fake news too, but in the good way. Simply because we are a part of society, never telling the things, hopefully not telling the things that people want us to tell. But art can tell us, or art can put up questions that is different from all those questions that we get from news, from reality, generally from reality. And art has got that specific thing that it is always man to man, artist to other artists, artists to other people. And that makes a big difference. I think that it's very hard to make art that should do something very special. That's not interesting at all. I think art should probably put up some questions that goes a little deeper or further than those questions we already walk around in this chaotic world with all those questions inside. Art could probably make some kind of stage where we can put our own questions into that piece of art. So artists is, of course, just people living in the same time as their audience. And I think that being a young person thinking I want to be an artist, it's a very big jump into something that have got some consequences. Art is a very strange thing in our society. It's a very strange thing because that we take it, for the first thing, we take it for granted. At the moment, we see that there is a lot of censor. We talk about in the Western world that we don't have censors, we don't censor art. Of course we do that, due to money or lack of money. I mean, we can politically very easy close down an art museum simply by not giving more money. We can close down the art schools. I mean, the Royal Danish Academy of Art in Denmark have lost a lot of support from the government. I guess it's more or less the same around the world. And from when I was a student there and until now, there's less teachers, less professors, there's less pupils there, less facilities. And of course, that is a kind of hidden censorship. That in fact, from political side, they don't want art. They don't want art as an active role in society. They probably can accept art as kind of clowns, like the ones in the show. But if those clowns are starting to tell or putting up some questions that is inconvenient for the society, then you can also see some reactions. And as I said before, art first really becomes visible when it disappears. Can you imagine a world without art? And when I'm talking about art in that sense, I mean art generally, all kind of arts. That means music. We don't have authors anymore, we don't have musicians anymore, we don't have visual artists anymore, we don't have theater. Nobody makes films. Can you imagine how we would be as human beings if that wasn't there? Suddenly we realize, wow, it has got some important role for us as human beings to understand what it is to be human being. I saw a program years back from America where there was some very old people interviewed what kind of influence the film had on them. And in fact, that included, a film includes a lot of arts in one. And for me, I mean, I got very surprised of their answers, because they said, no, first we had this film without sounds, but it was kind of a, what to call it, introduction into how to behave for us as young people in those days. And then there was suddenly the film with sounds came, and that was fantastic. They said that, all of them. Suddenly we had a kind of manual how to tell another person that we love them, how to behave when we had to show them emotions, and so on. And of course, art has got these functions too. That is a kind of manual, a very strange manual in being human beings. And even how art looks or sounds, it has got all that in common, that it is putting up questions to the world we are living in right now. It is putting up questions in the way we are treating our world today. It is putting up some question to yourself. For instance, if you're standing in front of or listening to some art that you don't like, if you're open, it will tell you, I feel something inside me. I don't like this. Why don't I like this? And suddenly, art becomes like a mirror, because suddenly you can see yourself, you can see your patterns, how you react on things, especially how you react on things that doesn't look like you want it to look. Then suddenly, you also get an image of how you wanted the world. Maybe you have never ever put it into really words. How do I want the world? How do I want to feel like? How do I want us to behave as human beings? So in fact, art has got a lot of levels. And I see very much art as a dialogue, a very big, complicated dialogue. It's probably as complicated as the world around us, because it's a part of the world around us. But it is a kind of stage where we can put our own questions into it, and we can have a dialogue with, let's say it's a painting or it's a piece of art, where we do, in fact, if we want, we can have a dialogue where we can both see the thing that the artists have been doing, the object, but we probably also get an idea that there's a person behind. And we also suddenly realize that we are a person having an idea. We can even have a discussion with the person next to us, looking at a piece of art or listening to a piece of music, because we are saying, how do you feel? How do you feel about this? We heard a story not that long ago where there was a kid who has been asking another kid, how does food taste in your mouth? That's very fantastic, because art is very much about that. And the question is very basic and very clear. And when the other person say, well, I can't explain, or they probably try to explain, well, a lot of it feels a little sour, then the other one can recognize and say, oh, that taste I know myself, I feel that too. And I know that most of you are art students, have made a choice that you want to go into art, want to see what art's about. And of course, I've been there too, asking myself what to do while alive, because when we are young, of course, we are looking around in the world and say, where do I fit in, and where don't I fit in? And for me, I was brought up after the Second World War, where there was a kind of general depression, and I had very hard understanding that I should go into a normal job, because none of it made sense for me. Until we started having televisions in the 60s, and there was programs, and some of those programs was in fact programs with portraits of artists. And suddenly I saw a world with grown-up people doing something that was very mysterious, probably, but very interesting, because it wasn't 1+1. It was a totally different world. I still remember seeing portraits of, for instance, Christo, that wanted to pack in buildings, mountains, whatever, just to pack it in. And for a young boy, that was just, whoa, how fantastic. What a strange world. That sucked me in, because it gave me such a lot of strange answers without answering anything. But I felt safe there, in a way. Yves Klein, that was painting just monochrome blues, or using the human body to make tracks on the canvas. And I think there was a lot of my generation that in fact saw these programs and got inspired. But then to do that next jump, to say, in fact, I want to go in and try to be a part of that. Because you can easily say, I would follow art always, because it's a big source of inspiration. The other thing is to be arrogant enough to say, probably I can be a part of that, probably I can give something too. That's a very hard questions you have to put yourself. Later on, when you come into the art school, that will just, double up those questions, and there will be a lot of doubts about, do I think I can do this? Because it's complicated. Because suddenly at the art school you have got a lot of questions about, who am I? How does the society look around you? How can I play a role on this scene? And today it is very complicated in one sense, simply because you get all the informations more or less just when it happens. When I was young, it probably took 10 years from some artist did something very good and new until I saw it, and probably 15 years before I saw it in real life. Simply because there was this kind of lack of time until it came out in the world. And today, I mean, if there's an artist doing something new, you probably can see it 10 minutes after he has finished in his studio. And there will be artists doing all kinds of things. And that's very confusing. In a way, art is so liberal, it's so free, that in fact that freedom very often can end up like a prison, because we are getting totally locked up in that space. Jesus, but I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, and realizing that, suddenly the next thing, or the next question is saying, but there's already someone doing that. And it can be very frustrating. So when I was at the Art Academy, for me it was very important that my academy in those days invited all the time artists from all around the world that I've heard about, because they were out there. And of course they had some answers on some very practical things sometimes. And I was very curious, answering them, how is it to be out there, to suddenly be, you know, a real artist, trying to survive out there? Because we were taught all the time that it's very hard, nobody wants you, you won't earn any money, it's a disaster to be an artist. But there in front of me, there was some artists that wasn't a disaster. At least they were surviving. At least they were accepting being counted as disasters. And they had some very basic answers very often to your questions. I remember an American artist, after I think I was asking him a lot of questions for 1 hour or something like that. He looked at me and he said, Michael, it's very simple. It's just to do it. And I went back home. Yeah, but that was exactly what I asked you, what to do. But of course, that's a price you have to live with. That you have to do the decisions. You have to do it. You have to do it whether people want it or not, or leave. But the problem is that it's very hard when you first make the first step into art. The first, what can you say, real movements into accepting that probably you would be an artist. Suddenly you realize it's not that easy to say, no, I don't want that anymore because it's too complicated. I want to be a lawyer. That's very few that can do that. In fact, once, due to my curiosity on these famous foreign artists coming to the academy, some of them were sitting, and at least two of them, that was Abramovich and Ulay, very famous performance artists in those days too, sitting together with two other American artists, and one of them was Lawrence Wiener, and it looked like they were talking about some very serious things, so I was kind of sneaking closer and closer to the table to let my ear follow their discussion. And finally, when I heard what they were talking about, was simply, what do you take for stomach aches when we are flying around the world all the time? What kind of pills do you take for sleeping? How much do you earn? It was so basic, so I started just laughing inside myself, you know. Okay, it's just human beings. It also has got a prize to be that famous because they were simply flying around, always having shows, performances around the world, being teachers in different art schools, and of course that must be hard too. So I guess that you want to say something.
I have a question. I'm looking at the images behind you, and
Passing by.
You say like, you got this advice, just do it. That's an easy advice, but for example, this one, what is it you do, what is it you did to have paintings like these? Like, just do it, but what?
Yes.
Do what?
I was, in the end of the academy days, been trying out a lot of different languages, as you are supposed to do, trying to find out who I was myself. And in doing that, together with a lot of discussions, a lot of philosophy, a lot of things we were reading, a lot of discussions about that the modernism was dead. That was a shock to a lot of persons suddenly to realize, Jesus, we are in the end of that line of development that modernism was. And suddenly people started writing about postmodernism. And I was just a young student, almost about leaving art school in those days. And we had a lot of discussions, also crossover discussions with musicians, filmmakers. What is this? What's going on right now? What can we do? And some of them said, my God, we are allowed, listen to that word, we are allowed again to do whatever we want. And there was a lot of French philosophers also discussing what is art, what's not art, and what happened when the modernism isn't there anymore. And I guess that since then we can only talk about one style, that's post-modernism. And it's like, going everywhere and anywhere at the same time. And in fact, I like that very much in the beginning, though it also, of course, makes a lot of problems finding your way into it. But one of the things I decided to do at the same time as I was working in a performance group where we were also testing out languages. And I had a lot of good experiences, in fact, being on the stage, standing, being a part of an image, doing something where we were, all these performances was very much about the lack of language, the lack of possibilities. They were pretty hard to do, and they were very extreme, these performances. And suddenly I started, thinking that, in fact, if you are going back to the Baroque, especially the Spanish Baroque, that's also kind of performances. It's just a Catholic church using the art for telling you something very specific. So I wanted to change that, try to see what happens if I am using an almost Baroque language, making some kind of performative images, where I'm taking my own actors with totally different bodies from our ideals, doing something very different from what I want to see. And in fact, I had a manual every day in the news. I could just take a newspaper, look at the front page, and you have been passing by a lot of these images. There was a mother strangulating her daughter. That was just a front page title, Mother Kills Her Daughter. And if you start as an artist thinking about that, I want to make an image of that. Then, of course, you have to put up some questions to that image. Jesus, what a lot of symbolic there is in that situation. Not only is she killing her own child, she's also killing her own sex. And therefore, of course, I tried to ask myself, what kind of scenery should I do that in? What could it be? Okay. I will take all the cliches. Okay, the woman probably not happy being situated in the kitchen. Of course, she's killing the daughter in the kitchen, with all the garbage falling out on the floor, with all the symbols in the, it was there before, can you go back? Or, and whilst working on sketching that and thinking about that painting, I was also suddenly seeing my reactions and the strange thing in our society. How come that we have to know such an awful tragedy? How come that's in the front page of a newspaper? Because it's just a horrible story. And therefore, I made this Baroque carpet in front of the image with the good and the bad angels. That's also a cliché from the Baroque times. And in fact, we are reacting in two ways reading that news. And we also do that today, even though it's war or other horrible things. We are so curious, like the green ones, getting almost, excited by seeing those nasty things. I mean, we just had a case in Denmark that I probably would have used in those days if that happened. You have probably heard it all around the world about this man building submarines who took this Swedish journalist on her last ride in the submarine. A horrible story. But press from all over the world have followed that case. And in fact, that's it's so scary that we are so curious about such a nasty thing, that he becomes almost world famous of doing such a horrible thing. And I think all of us in this room know both persons, both the acting good angel saying, oh my God, what a nasty thing. And the other one, I want to read more, I want to see. I also want to see, I did it yesterday, I want to see how much punishment he got. I mean, so I haven't been more clever, but I know what I'm doing. And so, in fact, this is just the front page. At the same time, I also knew that there was an expectation in the society how art should look like. I also knew that there were some images that you wasn't supposed to do. This was almost a mild one in comparison to some of the other ones I did. Because I was in fact looking for all those things that I wasn't allowed to do, and said, okay, I'm not allowed to do it, and I'm just leaving the academy now, and everyone has said from the beginning of that I can never live on that, so then I can as well be as honest as possible and do something that in fact is very strange, that we have got a lot of laws inside, both inside our societies, but these laws is also deeply grounded in our bodies, in our minds. So I decided to just go further in these. I tried, this is another one, a rodeo scene, where we normally have got this very beautiful romantic image of mother and child. And I guess that there's very few mothers that can't recognize something in that scenery, where suddenly they are probably just the awful animal being ridden around by the awful kid. And of course, in the shades, you see the kid's image, that the mother is not a beautiful, warm mother, it's just the animal I'm riding. But I looked at all those things that we are not supposed to talk about, and those things that, in fact, all of us know about. You have to be extremely naive not to know more or less what's around the world that is not nice to look at. And I decided, if you as an artist can't do it, then, I mean, nobody can. Then the press shouldn't be allowed to work with those things. Because I do it just as a human being, just as one person, trying to take it out of society, try to change it just a little bit, and say, well, the world is probably not that fantastic as we want it to be. The world has got very big problems, and in fact, I do that even today. I mean, also in this show, trying to take out something that is most convenient not to touch, probably even also as an artist. I mean, it would probably be much more convenient to do something else. But it is, in fact, interesting to look at all those images, because that's none of the images, none of the topics I'm touching that we don't know. And suddenly you see that there's a lot of different levels of censorships, even inside ourselves. What we allowed to show at the moment, for instance, at the social medias, we've got all these discussions about nudity in art, because Facebook and also I can see in Instagram, they are kind of censoring old classic artworks because there's naked bodies. And as an artist, first of all, it's very strange just to look at that and say, wow, this is a very good image of something that that probably has got a much bigger image just behind. This is telling, I mean, a lot more about how we are controlled. This is telling much more about some new laws coming into reality. After living in the 60s and the 70s, where all those things was torn apart, people were saying, we don't want these laws. We want to be allowed to do whatever we want to do. Suddenly, I mean, as I said before, museums are also being censored by the government simply due to money. It's very easy to close the mouth on art, at least they think, just to take away the money. And I've been showing in China, and in China I got censored with some paintings in the south of China, I mean, there wasn't bad at all. It was just naked bodies, and this is not even bodies. I mean, this is paintings. And the same paintings was a month later shown in Beijing, where there wasn't censored. So it's simply up to some few persons or some government to say what's allowed and what's not allowed. And it seems like human beings kind of have forgotten that in the end of the day, it is in fact us deciding what we are allowed to do and not. And there was a young student yesterday asking me some questions, and she asked, the last question was, do you see some change in young person's reaction right now? And I said, yes, there is some reactions. I think that even NRA in the States are shocked about the reaction after the last school shooting, because it has been totally impossible to change that law for years, but suddenly because all the school children stood up bravely and kept on, now I don't see so much, so probably it's just swallowed in this lake of everything that we are swimming around in. But hopefully they haven't forgot. And even, I mean, in the end they got Trump to say there is something wrong about that law. I mean, I couldn't have imagined that power. So that's very nice to see. And we also saw all the women's march in United States especially, that certainly had some kind of echo around the world. And I think that, wow, yeah, I forget that there's some image behind me. This is probably just a very, very simple illustration, a piece of art of how we thinking, hvad er det, fødekæden, what's that in English? The food chain. The food chain. I just turned it around. I said, how come that we think all the time, and that is, I mean, as good to think today as then. I did that in 90, in the year 90, I think, or 91. And so I changed that whole food chain from human beings and went down to the flies around the pea, because probably they are in the top of the food chain and not us. This is just called blind painting. Yeah.
I want to ask you a question, because you're actually telling us about, like, I'm actually just being honest. I already introduced you like this engagement in the art to show things, but what I find interesting is that just by being honest and not just showing the way you think it is all of a sudden also engagement. Is it, do you think that that's the thing, or is there another thing? If you say like, okay, I'm an artist and I'm an engaged artist, you already sit in this field of opposites, like I'm against something or I pro something else, but all in the end you're quite neutral actually.
I'm trying to be, but of course, I mean, a lot of persons throughout my entire years as an artist say that I'm very provoking. And I've never been seeing that. I've been seeing the world around me being very provocative. I mean, I've seen so many images, so many lies, so many, what do you call it, so much blindness, both from a political side, from people in general. I mean, so much blindness due to kind of laziness, I guess. I mean, the whole of Europe is very lazy at the moment if we don't at least see ourselves as living on top of the world. We do that. And the reason why we feel so forced into a corner at the moment due to the crisis of refugees, in fact there was more refugees in the Balkan crisis than today, is probably because somehow inside our body we also know that we can't continue living in that welfare and wealthy style if the rest of the world wants to do that ourselves. So either we have to be honest and say, but listen, the Chinese, the Africans, the Indians, of course, they have got the same wishes as we have. We have to accept that. And that is very complicated because we also know that we are getting more and more people in the world. It makes a very big problem because we don't have resources for that. And I mean, in extreme cases, the Americans is reacting like that at the moment. In fact, coming back to some very nasty point of views where they simply say, you have to stay in poverty because we don't want to leave our position as the biggest in the world. And we can laugh about Trump, and we can look at the states behaving strange at the moment, but in fact we do ourselves. And the reason why I didn't call it Circus World, because it could have been that easily, or Western world, is simply because as closer we come to ourselves, as more blind we become. It's always the other ones. I mean, at the moment, I mean, it's so much easier to say that, for instance, the Muslim world has got all the problems. We hear that at the moment around all Europe pointing out. And they are not much better, of course, because they're saying the Western world is the whole problem. And in fact, we don't solve anything if we're pointing out. We don't solve anything in the world if we don't see our own position. And I think art is a very good tool to do that.
A question for the audience, actually. All art students, of most of you, some teachers as well. How is provocative work made by you as a student received at the academy? Is there something to say about that? Someone? Nothing to say about that, I guess. It doesn't seem to be a relevant question, or nobody wants to say something about it. I'm just gonna give the mic to you.
Well, I'm in college for being an art teacher. So yeah, I'm more. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. Yeah, we don't really do a lot with that theme, I think, because I'm teaching to be a teacher. I'm studying to be a teacher, so we don't really, handle this type of art, I think. We're more about what art does for students and how we can do what you do right now. You explain what art means to you, and that's very meaningful for me to, Do you want to say something? Oh, yeah, so I don't really think we handle that theme in our...
Critical thinking?
Yeah, we do a lot of critical thinking. We handled the fact of activism in art last term, and how that's useful. So how can we measure the activity of activism in art? So if I'm looking to your paintings, am I changing because of that? How do we measure that? So we handle those themes, but we are not going extremely in it. So
It's very hard, I think, at the art schools. I think it's very hard to have this discussion because art is going everywhere. But of course, the critical mind, I mean, I think that is really a basic tool for doing art. If you don't have that sense of, then I think you will just copy totally what you are supposed to do. I mean, you have to put up questions. How come that we say that art should look like this today? Because if you are a young artist, you probably should get to learn about all this, but also get to learn about where you agree and where you don't agree. Because you have to do the art of tomorrow. You have to do something changes. Because if we don't change the art all the time, both the images but also the idea of art, it simply disappears. And in the end of the day, we will just be some playful toys for rich people. And in times due history, art turned out to be just, you know, something for rich people could get amused about 3 seconds after work. And I think that art is much more powerful than that. And you also have to have the critical sense throughout your whole career as an artist, because you also have to ask all the time, how come I keep on doing this? Why don't I move? And if I move, you also have to be critical. Why did I move? Do I become better or don't I? Do I dare to do this or don't I dare to do this? How much does people's reaction towards my work influence my work? Those questions you simply have to do as an artist. You probably have to do that as a human being too, in all kind of relationship with the world, with your closest, with your work and so on. But we don't have the time today to come to the end of that. But I think that's one of the things that you can do as an artist, that is take the time to think all the thoughts to the very end. And keep on doing it, because the world is changing all the time, you are changing all the time, your age is changing all the time. I mean, just the last 10 years, the world has changed, I mean, upside down. I mean, just 10 years ago, none of us was walking around with a phone all the time, seeing what the other artist was doing around the whole world. We think it's a tool that we've been having all the time. So I don't even know how I could live in the world without having that phone all the time. It's pretty scary that it comes so fast. That in fact, some guys I know in the States, I can see what he's doing in his studio. It's fantastic. I don't have to travel anymore. But it also changes me, and it also changes me in the negative way. And I guess that most of you also realize the negative side, that we suddenly are totally dependent on that phone. And of course, there's a lot of censorship in that phone too. We just have had all the things about Facebook, and suddenly, I mean, Instagram has got some issues about what you're allowed to put in, and we don't know how much we are used by these big companies. At the moment, in fact, I see that there's a lot more of commercials taking into my Instagram, where I started 2 years ago. It was mostly art and things, and suddenly it's a lot of stupid ads from all kind of things that is polluting my brain. Yeah.
Well, we are working now on some data design, and exactly the topic you were talking about Facebook and social media, and that's exactly the same thing what you said just 5 minutes ago. We're always pointing at everything that's wrong, but we're still using it. So where does it end and where does it stop? Because at school we're now working with this problem, but we're working with it by doing it. So how do you solve that?
Yeah, I can give you the same question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think let's go back to the quote I used to introduce you. Like, fake news is also art. It might be that Instagram ads can also be art in a way. Just a hunch of my mind, but
I think a lot of artists probably use Instagram as a kind of stage. And of course, suddenly there are some artists you probably wouldn't have known about before. That is popping up there, that seems being interesting. But it's also, I mean, having that negative effect that I saw 10, 15 years ago, I think it was, where I was traveling around the world. And it was in the time where all the academies was making the last, for those leaving the school, what do you call it, the last show. And it was just 1 year after Peter Lindbergh was really canonized in the whole world. And I must tell you, I haven't seen that many red canoes before. There was red canoes and colored brick walls everywhere around the world. So it didn't make a change that I was in San Francisco, or I was in Auckland, New Zealand, I was in Beijing, and I was in Jerusalem. And I saw all these schools, and I think that the images were so similar that if I've had all the pupils in one group show, you couldn't even see who came from New Zealand, who came from the States, who came from Jerusalem. But I could see very clearly how much influence we are in this horizontal level of information right now. And it is, maybe it's because I'm getting old, but I think still we have to remember that, in fact, we have also got a vertical line of art history, a development. And it seems like that knowledge kind of died out more or less with the postmodernism. And that's pretty scaring because none of us today are so talented that in fact we would have gotten this crazy idea to start to make a stick and put some pigs there in the end and mix some soil with some oil. Find a piece of cloth or a board or a cliff and start to make images. I mean, we are just in a link of developments and development also into the idea of what art is about. And you had this question, what can we do about it? I mean, the modernists really had the idea that making totally new images, totally new languages, taking, for instance, away the human body. They really believed that we could make better beings, better people, and we didn't. Of course, that was based very much into art history itself. It was also based in those things that happened around people. I mean, we had the First World War. We all know Guernica due to what happened in Spain. And especially after the Second World War, people really needed something else. We needed to do something new so those things couldn't happen again. So there was this development of a totally new language. And today, that is just, I mean, the modernism is just a tiny little part of all the knowledge of art. And we have forgotten that a lot of the modernism, in fact, was due to some research some artists did. First, there was a lot of research in Japanese art because it was totally different. The aesthetics was totally different. And later on, the modernist was simply copying and studying what they call the primitive art. That was just the African art. Just the word is simply scaring that we call it the primitive art. Because it was just other aesthetics, another way to use art. And today we don't see those links, but they can be very much a key sometimes to what to do further out on that track of art that the next generation have to do. Very often, I think, and you are teaching in art, I think that sometimes it's very important just to realize what we come from and why it appeared. And I mean, here in Holland, it's so obvious what the Dutch 16th century art did to people and what it was based in. I mean, it's very often you probably see something clearer in your own time if you're going back and see the reactions. But one thing is 100% sure, that those artists you know today did something they wasn't supposed to do in the days where they lived, at least most of them. And they had lots of troubles in those days too. I mean, the Italian artists, I mean, they were simply struggling, fighting with different regions and very, very rich popes and dukes that in fact bought these artists. And the artist was, some of them, Caravaggio was really a nasty guy. He ended up killing someone, and only because he was so good in painting, somebody saved him, put him into another region of Italy and got the story hidden. But it was reactions. I mean, and what Caravaggio did had a vast influence on North European art. Rembrandt couldn't have done his things. He probably never saw, probably saw some prints of Caravaggio. But he heard about this clair-obscur, and of course he could imagine. And sometimes I think that this imagination, we are losing that imagination because today it's just laying in our pocket. I mean, because we human beings have got a lot of errors, and a lot of art appears of errors, not of the right things, but it in fact comes because something happens, it becomes strange, because and then suddenly we've got an artist like El Greco that in fact is a kind of almost an error in art history, simply because he became so extremely religious that he would make a language for God. And he was also a very basic person for modern art, simply because he did something that did something in the eye.
So could we say, like all students on art academies, it's not about learning how to make good art, but how to develop the courage to do something which you aren't supposed to do? Maybe that's a better skill to learn on an art academy than just getting to know the materials, composition, stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, probably you should have more. You should be more brave just to do what you are asked to do, because nobody thanks you for that. In the end, that's some question there.
Yeah, questions. Please, can you stand up and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Eden, and I'm studying at Willem de Kooning on exchange. I was just wondering about what you said about the new aesthetics and language, and through Instagram, lots of people use the features in Instagram to send kind of visual artworks to their friends all the time. So I was just wondering whether you think that it's things like Instagram and Snapchat are kind of turning the general population into artists just through everyday communication, or whether that's making people somehow less creative.
Yeah, probably this is just what Andy Warhol said many years ago, that everyone will have their so and so many minutes as famous persons or artists. And it can both be good and bad, because at the same time I really believe in art also as communication. Art is not art can be a lot of things, and I mean, it's very hard to put up limits for art. I think we shouldn't do that. We should be curious. But to be curious is both to see the good and the bad things. And I think that we are probably using art too much on the internet. But at the same time, when looking at internet, it is so rare I in fact see something that's, that I get really surprised and say, wow, what was that? In fact, I started on internet because I thought, maybe there's someone out there doing something that really could give me a big shock, and that hasn't happened until now. I mean, most artists do what the other artists do, and there's certainly a common language all the time. And at the same time, of course, there's the level that we all see, the level of how you can both see how intelligent the artists are, you can also see how talented they are, and you can go on Instagram and you can find some artists that is, in classical sense, you know, extremely talented. They are so good in painting and they have got absolutely nothing to say. So it's just, I mean, copying some master that was living 400, 500 years ago. And you can see some very young, fresh artists, and some of them probably don't even know that they are looking like Basquiat, but they just do works very much like Basquiat, simply because they've got more or less the same basic modern immediate reaction on the world, and are talented in this natural way. I mean, and later on, some nasty person will tell them, Jesus, this is exactly what Basquiat did years back, and they will get their first depression. But I don't know, I think, in fact, what I don't like about Instagram is that we all become little judges. And I think it would have been so much nicer without this little heart I like and not like. In the beginning, I just used it because I liked what I saw. But suddenly, I've also seen people using it, you know, that I won't follow you anymore, and that kind of sense, you know, because so it suddenly becomes this kind of a punishment system. And I've had enough of that in my real life. I don't want to to give that via that system. And so we have to remember also as artists that art is totally for free. I mean, we do that, even how we are treated later on as artists. We do it because we want to do it, and we can stop whenever we want to do it. And people are allowed to dislike the art. They are allowed not to go and see your shows. They are allowed to not like your works. And that's the basic thing that we have to accept. And I think that these social media suddenly, you know, is probably pushing on a thing that's very bad in our community from the beginning of all this about, are you better or worse than this and this? I mean, and we all know that being number two is the worst of everything, so just don't be number two. I mean, that's the only one crying in the Olympics.
I'm not an artist, but when I saw Michael's show, Circus Europa, I was thinking that it was a lot about not only physical borders, but also the mental borders, taking it back to what we're talking about right now, being judges. And I want to ask you if, because I think one thing right now, these years or these days, is the political correctness that is moving into, at least we can see it a lot in Sweden, we've seen it in the States, and I think it's also here. And I'm going to ask you, is it something that you also feel in your studies, that the political correctness is slowly moving in, and what you're talking about, please don't, I mean, ask the person next to you, how does it taste in your mouth, but the feeling of that the artists have to stand against this political correctness that is changing the society. Sweden, for instance, is a symbol of what is going on right now. They're changing, for instance, the feminism, for instance, in Sweden is so big that it's almost killing people, killing men from being judged by without being in front of a court. It's not anymore that you cannot say he about God, for instance. It's a hen. It's a mix between she and he, and I'm a little afraid it could also be Instagram helping that it is spreading, and I don't want it to be a big thing in the art world. I think maybe the art world can be one institution that can actually react towards it, because if it comes into the art also, it won't allow you to do whatever you're doing anymore just freely. It'll take you maybe into I don't know if you feel the way I do, but it can take you into certain directions that are the only ones that you're allowed to. That's just a question.
Can you bring the mic to you?
Thank you. My name is Alex. I study lifestyle transformation design at the Willem de Kooning Academie. I think to your question, I've grown up with social media pretty much, at least through puberty. And I think part of that is looking for acceptance on the internet as well as in real life. And so part of maybe that slipping into arts is, and the political correctness is the part that we are looking for acceptance and being taken in, and that maybe translates into not going against the system, but kind of taking it on and trying to move it further as opposed to really, breaking it. That's my view.
Yeah, but it's I mean, that's a very complicated thing, because, it's complicated as an artist, because first of all, an artist always, in my mind, shall have to be honest. Even you have to be honest towards yourself. Then you have to, of course, be honest also asking, is this right to think? Is that right what I'm seeing? How does that influence me? And what kind of images will come out of that? And I think that, for instance, all our identities is changing very much at the moment. And they did in the 70s too. In the 70s too, there was a lot of political correctness, because there was a lot of things that both people wanted to change, and also there was very much things that had to be changed. And then there was a couple of years after that where both art and people generally became much more liberal, and putting questions about that, is this right? And every step on that is probably has got their radical sides, and of course, in a period like at the moment, because the world itself becomes very radical, the reactions on that is kind of a mirror of that. And for instance, the Me Too thing was absolutely based in real things, real, a huge problem. But the thing was that very few of these things could be brought into court. And in fact, in the Western world, we have got a system, a law system, that you are innocent until the opposite are proven. And of course, it's not that on the website. It's not like that when we see the big movements. And there will be someone that is judged without having done anything. And that's pretty scary. I mean, in the French Revolution, there was certainly also a lot of heads that was chopped off. That probably wasn't due to anything but some kind of a mass reaction. And I'm always very afraid of mass reaction because that can make also a track of very nasty things. But I think most people in the world at the moment are so frustrated that there is no lines anymore. I mean, for very few years, at least we had the belief that we had a United Nations that was functioning. We had some kind of basic rules, what we were supposed to do in war and what we certainly wasn't supposed to do anymore. The Geneva Convention, for instance. We had an institution in Europe that was kind of, made out of a lot of problems from history. It wasn't perfect, but it was an institution trying to do something better. That is also under big discussion at the moment. And due to that, I think we get very frustrated, and I think sometimes we start to react very, irrational, and we suddenly start to, hunt something that is tiny little in comparison to those problems that is probably igniting our reaction. Yeah.
Hello. Does it work? Yeah. As a director of the Kunsthal, I want to maybe give some trends we notice, and also maybe finish with a positive note in the sense that what you just asked, Christine, that I think cultural institutions can also be part of this discussion, not only the artist, but I think as an institution you can't be neutral, you have to take position. And in fact, what we see, and that might be positive in this discussion, is that now we have, next to Michael's show, Circus Europa, we have the hyperrealism sculpture show. With, I don't know, have you seen it? Well, there's a lot of nude in the show. And as you said, in the political correctness, in Dutch we have the word truttigheid. I don't know if you recognize that. And you can't show too much nude anymore, and people kind of either dislike it or think it's a little bit scary. But a lot of these sculptures in the hyperrealism show, as in a Michael Kvium show, are naked or nudity. And what we notice is that for once, a lot of people come to visit the show, so they want to have the encounter with the arts. So it's not only that they like it or dislike it, maybe seeing it on Instagram, but because they might see it on Instagram, they come to visit, to experience, to have the real work. So that's positive, and I think also what we noticed that a lot of people share what they see in the arts. So not even from only their own art, but visiting a museum or a cultural institution, they like what they see, they can identify with the arts, or they post it as a sign of I can to start a discussion with their own community. So using Instagram to kind of express your feelings about what you see, and especially when you have the encounter with real art, is a very positive thing. And what we also see in the Netherlands, at least, is that the museum visits are growing still every year. And for our own sake, I can say that the visitors' numbers of the Kunsthal are also growing, and people really engage with the shows, even when it's difficult art. And I think that's a very positive development, in a way. So that was something I want to share with you.
Yeah, I think, in fact, that at least I feel like that. That in fact, I trust in artists because they are not trying to sell you anything. I mean, at least, I mean, they're trying to survive probably. But it is one person who is saying something to yourself. And this is very rare. I mean, a lot of other institutions inside art, for instance, doing films, I mean, it involves such a lot of people and such a lot of money, and suddenly it also includes a lot of persons that want to decide what you can do and what you can't do. And I think in that way, I think visual arts is still pretty free and pretty simple. And why shouldn't you trust another person giving something to you for free? And I think when people is, I mean, searching around for some quiet places where they probably can go through their mind, because I think, in fact, art is probably a stage where you go through your own mind. You don't certainly go through the artist's mind, because his problems or her problems and her topics is probably not yours. So, in fact, if it's strong enough, you can put your own questions in there, and you can deal with it, and you get the time for dealing it. So I think a lot of persons coming to museums that probably wouldn't have done it 15, 20 years ago, does it now because it's a very quiet place. And there's no, I mean, there's no noise. In my show, there's some noise, but they're not trying to sell soap at the same time. They're not trying to, I mean, more or less everything is now interrupted in noise. People trying to sell you something that you don't need. And I'd say from the beginning of that, I'm not selling you something that you need. This is just an offer that you can take or not take. Yeah.
I study art in St. Joost at Den Bosch. I'm Wanda. I did have to say my name, right? Okay. And I had a question. Do you think that the term art can also be sometimes dangerous in the way that it institutionalizes ideas into the art world and then it becomes sort of more harmless?
But that happens all the time. And luckily there will be vast numbers of new artists coming and doing something else, because everything will be captured, and I think, in fact, things will be captured faster now, and that's why there's a kind of responsibility on you guys that have to go out being artists to be awake, because it goes very fast that you probably will be taken away from what you were doing, or it will be misused, or the human eye is very fast-moving. So something can be interesting today, and tomorrow it won't be seen anymore. And that will, I think maybe it's been like that. It's just the speed of it. It's been like that all the time. But the speed of it is very fast, and the circumstances that artists living in is also changing. I mean, both in the good way, like for instance here. I mean, there's more institutions where you see art. There's very nice institutions, and the institutions are more open and is in fact battling in between each others to make the best, and that will always heighten the quality. But I mean, we are all of us forced into a battle all the time to keep it clean. I mean, and to keep it clean is maybe also hard-working, jumping all the time. Don't you feel like that sometimes? Even before you feel like it yourself, you can see, Jesus, now I have to jump again because somebody's eating me. So. Was that okay answer for this? Because it is complicated.
Yes, and can I ask one more question, or is that okay?
Yeah, yeah.
Because I was having a discussion only yesterday with my teachers. We at the academy in Den Bosch, we try to have the education as open and as free as possible. Like, you can do experiments, you can fail, you can do absolutely horrible work. And still you can talk about your process and what you discovered. and that's kind of the idea. But we find constantly that it's very difficult to uphold the balance between that and the expectations that have to be met from higher up, from the political, and then there's also the language which teachers have to use to talk with the students. They cannot say their opinions because that might shape the students. So I would like, maybe you can say something about that difficult situation of the academy themselves, like in a sort of difficult place between the political, the world, and the artist who has to discover themselves.
Yeah, even that has got two sides, because there is certainly a lot of things you can't say today, even though that you see it. And those times I've been teaching in art, it is very complicated, because you also have to see yourself all the time. You have to look at yourself, how your reactions are. And I mean, when I look at some person's work, at that level they are in the art school, I can also see there is possibilities that can go in all directions. So, of course, sometimes there is an expectation that the teachers have to be very tough. It was like that when I was in the art school. The first I ever got told, or we got told the first day we came to the art school, that the reason why we came so many in that year was we was equally bad, all of us. And then it kept on by a negative reaction. I mean, that was the idea of the 70s, that you were only learning by being hit all the time. So after 1 year, 1.5 years in the art academy, two of the students in my group had committed suicide, and some more did later on. Later on, the school changed, and so people became much more nicer towards each other. The teachers became much nicer, finding the good stuff in what they saw, which I, in fact, think was nicer, because it was certainly a tough time being a student with these nasty comments all the time. But at the same time, there was also sneaking in this political correctness, that it wasn't allowed to say something because that could be misunderstood, that it was either, due to the sex, you said that, and so suddenly you have to be so aware how you talk with the students. Suddenly you wasn't colleagues anymore. Suddenly you had to be aware all the time, I'm not a colleague, even though we are colleagues, because we have made the same choice. Suddenly I had to be very aware, I'm a teacher, I have to take care, I have to remember that time has changed, that I can't say what I see. That is very irritating. Then at least I have to learn the pupils for a longer time, for a longer period, so we can be very honest. And normally that becomes very relaxing for both parts. But I mean, how can you, as a professor today, say, where everything is open, this will end up good, it looks like shit. You can also end up saying, this looks so talented, it looks so good, but I don't think you have got a career in front of you because it doesn't fit in. We can, as a teacher, it's as complicated as it is to be you, to say whatever it will bring. But of course, as an artist, you will always look at something that is that makes some reaction in you, that's kind of ignite inside yourself, something that irritates you, something that provokes some thoughts inside you. If it doesn't do that at all, even though it looks very nice or very awful or whatever it does, then it's very hard to have a discussion.
Let's put that in context, because we have a few portfolios already sent in by a few students.
Yeah.
So let's make it concrete to see how you as an artist react on work from Bart. I think you're Bart, yeah. I'm going to ask Joël to put on the PowerPoint from Bart. What I would like to do, Bart, to have you introduce yourself a bit, tell something about your work, and then let's see how the colleague artist here, Michael, will react on that.
Yeah.
I'm Bart. I study illustration here in Rotterdam.
Can we get you on the screen?
Yeah, we're working on having your...
Okay.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny how we talked a lot about how sort of ideas behind the work and the context, and a lot of about social political theming. Right now my work is really absent of something social political. Seeing your work was really motivating, because figurative work really, I feel like, is kind of discouraged sometimes by the academy. I mean, not really in a way that they want to see abstract art, but more that sort of drawing really realistic, or studies of anatomy are. You don't see that all that often. Okay. Ja, ik snap het dus. Yeah, so basically, currently I'm just sort of studying anatomy, and what you can see here are I try to combine human shapes with plants, basically. I really try to put some sort of narrative in my work. So here I have these sort of, it's kind of blurry, these sort of characters, and I really like to, I kind of want to invite the viewer to sort of make up their own story, which is kind of, I think, interesting, because you really already have a sort of story behind it. Yeah, I think I'm just going to scroll through these.
We have a question for Michael about your work.
Not really.
Not really. No, I've got a comment, I guess, because I think one of those things you really see today is that, and in fact it's not new, but there's a lot of crossovers in art. I mean, we don't have these lines in between the different arts anymore. So you can easily, you can even do comics and call yourself an artist. You can also make a mix in between those things. You can work with figurative and you can work with non-figurative, and you can do the both at the same time. And for instance, artists like Olaf Eliasson, in my point of view, he's halfway into a kind of architectural point of view or design point of view, and the other point is very much based in very radical art from the 70s. So, and of course, you can also see that in music. Today we've got a new word, and either we use it directly or not. We are sampling, because we have got such a lot of knowledge. And we don't have these rules. If you want to be a visual artist, you're not supposed to be drawing in that way. You're not supposed to do this. You're not supposed Instead, in fact, it's the opposite way. I'm not to tell you what you are supposed to do and not supposed to do. So, and in fact, that opens up to a lot of new languages if we are, awake to see these possibilities. And you had such one that was a black-white one, a little way back. This one, yeah, where. I reacted immediately when I saw that because, there's so many different both cultures and signals and signs. You can be into that drawing for a long time. That could also have been a painting that turned into a painting. And you have got some Japanese-like signs coming down in that side. You have got a lot of Hieronymus Bosch fragments into it. And weirdness, and altogether, you make your own images. And I think if I should advise you, then I would just go further in. That means that really asking yourself, what happens if I continue this to make it more and more like this one, complicated, complex? Because this is, of the things you have been showing, this is the one that looks, in my mind, most like our world outside, very complicated. There's no central thing. And you've got this almost like advertising sticking down in one side. And just to be thinking about what you're doing, follow your instinct. That's always very good. And then not leave it like that, but also asking, how come I just decided to do this? And asking, because probably there's some motives or some ideas just behind that. I mean, you can uncover. And sometimes it is due to cleaning up. Later on, probably you only need one person in the end. Or you, in fact, clean up all those things that you can refer to, things you've seen before, and only pick up those things that you created absolutely by yourself, and then make it more and more complex and more complicated. Later on, you can then ask, how big should it be? I can easily imagine a painting 10 times 20 meters with figures that size. That could be very nice.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
A lot of my work kind of, I feel like because I don't paint it, it sort of feels more like comic art, sort of more cartoonish. And I was wondering, do you sometimes worry that people find your work too funny or approach it as sort of cartoony?
But people do. And because if somebody gets very provoked by that my persons, both that I use the sense of humor, but I also at the same time it's very basic about that, because I know that a lot of topics that I'm working with, without that, people wouldn't even look at it. So in fact, I'm sneaking a lot of nasty stuff with a little laugh. And at the same time, also very much like to go away from the classical ideals. I could easily paint the persons like classical ideals, and it would. Can you imagine my paintings with nice, beautiful ladies and Roman bodies? I don't think they had the same language. So I think I just had to obey the thing in front of me, and so it ended up like that. Because every time I've tried to say, no, let me try to make the persons more normal. Because the rest of your life, you're trying to escape from yourself. And every time you do it, suddenly, sometimes you succeed in coming away, and suddenly you realize, Jesus, I'm looking like a totally other artist that I know, and he's been doing, or she's been doing that for 20 years. Why should I do this? And then then you're thrown back in your box and have to continue.
But your work really wants to tell something, wants to sort of ask something about I think very serious, big themes about Europe and the social-political state. Do you ever worry that because your characters can come off a bit silly, that people don't that message doesn't go through.
Yeah, and for some people it won't. Simply, that's a chance you have to take. And there will be people that are thinking in other, simply have got another idea of art, so this is just the worst they've ever seen. You have to accept that from the beginning of, you can't please them all. You can do your best, and you can find the language that, together with the piece in front of you throughout the years, that suits you the most. And the rest is up to people, because I'm not a new religion, and I certainly don't want to be that. I don't want to convince people that I'm right. If they think I'm wrong in their mind. So, simple as that.
Okay.
I can be hurt sometimes. That's another thing, that's personal.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Bart. Thank you. Marius, that's you? Yeah. I'm gonna ask you to put on your work. Could you introduce yourself and...
I'm Marius. I do not study arts, but I study biology in my 4th year. And I'm kind of nervous now. I know this is not my thing.
I'm too, so just be relaxed.
Yeah, so I got some work that will be shown in a minute, maybe. I will just wait on that. I don't really have a question as well, because I didn't prepare that much. But I like to have a discussion. I think that's something I would like.
Just gonna find it. Oh yes.
Yeah, so I got different kind of works. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. These are my works. So this is a painting. I don't know, I'm searching for this word in English, and it's vervreemding. I don't know if you understand in Danish the word. Estrangement.
Estrangement, yeah.
So I just a few days ago I realized that my work was about that. Since now, yeah. And while I was sending this to you, to the Kunsthal, and it was kind of nice to understand. So here you see a woman, and she kind of wears a mask for half of her face, and yeah. So
this is totally different.
Yeah, this is totally different.
Yeah.
So I want to come here maybe later. This is a work I made here in the Kunsthal, actually, like 2 years ago. And it's also about estrangement with these horses and this
being torn apart.
Very painful experience.
Yeah.
And it was also a little bit about like inner estrangement and outer estrangement. So 2 different kind of estrangement. Here you see this painting of this woman, a young woman, I think. And she is growing up, I think, and yeah, this kind of growing up has a lot of estrangement as well, in a sense. And with the environment, there's a reaction to be like this.
How is the link between those paintings and the 3-dimensional part?
Yeah, so it's good to know. So
this one?
This is kind of more like this one. It's a dollar sign in a kind of greenhouse, and the link is because we are kind of estranged with our money and our nature in some sense, like a very big sense actually today. So this is kind of a flipping coin in a sense. So what are we going to do? Is there money that's going to make our nature, form our nature, or is it the other way around, that our nature is forming our capital or economy, basically?
Yeah.
So it's, for me, a very big issue, and I think also in the world. And here you see it more close, like a close-up.
Yeah. I think that what I see, first of all, of course, I did that too. I was really trying out everything. I did performances, I did comic strips, I did films, I was doing paintings in different styles. But everything, of course, is based to some feelings that you want to express. I think most art is about that. Of course, and therefore I'm asking you the combination, because it could also easily have been two artists here. The paintings is very much, I mean, based in pretty classical modernist style. I mean, it's a little bit of Picasso in that painting. Which is not bad. But the question is if you could have done that before in 1930.
Probably not.
No. It was very brave of him to do that in those days, where and that's the problem for young artists. It's pretty safe whatever you do. I mean, before it was really unsafe, most of the things, and you could face a lot of problems whatever you did. You can't do that anymore. And I think that that probably also make you just accept the things you do a little too fast. That if you had this disrespect or wall against you, you would probably work and work and work and work to come into something underneath. Because, I mean, let's say you were working very much in that style and in those paintings. If you were working both in that style and in the paintings all the time, then I would really also have the questions standing up to myself, which of those two things gives me the most? Can they kind of influence each other? And the influence I can't see right now, because you are also that young.
Yeah, I'm figuring it out.
Yeah. So that's my immediate reaction on the things.
That's also my first reaction, I think, to these works.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, how do you feel like? So this is how you feel like about the work, or is it just a reaction? In a sense?
There can be a lot of things, because I suppose things I can. I mean, practically say that is changeable, and you could do better, or But we don't do that anymore, because you have to find out that
just
way.
Like a general feeling.
No, the general feeling is that in fact the three-dimensional thing seems immediately more modern than the paintings. It seems, to my eye, much more modern, where there's, there's some kind of nostalgia in these paintings. I mean, there is a certain style from art history that you like, and that doesn't necessarily something bad. Certainly not, because.
Do I have to ask myself about this nostalgia?
You should ask yourself, because if you really like paintings like that, you really should go this vertical way down to that period where people were doing that and really study it, because in fact that helps you a lot, because somebody did it for many years. That means that you don't have to do that, all that testing. So in fact, instead you can use that style and that time as the point from where you can jump, and we are forgetting that very much at the moment. I know an American artist, and he loves Cobra artists. And when I got to learn him, he lives in New York, and I mean, for us living in Holland and Denmark, Cobra, oh my God, we've seen so much of that. But he is totally hysteric about that art, and he just wants to go to use that as a step to make his own art. So that can be a very fantastic thing, but he's certainly studying all the ideas about Cobra and what they were thinking, how they were painting, and so on, all the time, you know. As we did, in fact, the classic ideals was that you were supposed to study for years the old masters before you were allowed to think yourself. So that's my advice.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's an advice to all of you. Study art history. I want one last portfolio from Anna. You're a graphical designer, which is something else than being an art student, although art academies do have a graphic design department, of course. Yeah, can you tell a little bit about yourself, what your educational background is, and what we're going to look at?
Hello. My name is Anna. I study at the Graafslyceum Rotterdam, but I'm pretty nervous because it's my first year there, so it's not really like good as this, but yeah.
I've been nervous all my life, so it doesn't help.
Okay.
No.
No.
But I mean, they are images. This is an image. I mean, that could easily be that could easily be a piece of art too. So, and as I talked before, I think that those borders we had before, from industrial design to art to I mean, they are very weak today. We can do a lot of crossovers, and you can easily do art at the same time as you do that. You can also, I mean, you can also be an artist, being doing a graphic design, and you see all this mix all the time, and I think that's very healthy for both art and design. That in fact we are learning and using each other to get further. I mean, a guy like Andy Warhol, for instance, Andy Warhol. He was an industrial designer before he became a world famous visual artist, and you can see that all the way through his career that he had a knowledge learned from that school that he was using both in his silk screens and his drawings and so on, and there is quite a lot of industrial designers that is in fact making art pieces too. I mean,
yeah, I was wondering what you think about it or something. I don't know.
Yeah. But this looks like these things you have shown here is very fresh. There was a kind of a painting. Can you go through them? I'll just say, no, this one that was jumping out because that was. This is much more looking like visual art. I mean, a piece of art to me, because if you're a graphic designer, normally you have to do that for something. That's a big difference. While the free art is, we don't have to sell anything, but as a graphic designer, you probably have to do something usable. It has to be used for something, and it can be very weak, but still there's somebody asking you to do a poster for something, or there's some company that wants you to design something. So it is different. There's a big difference there from being being a visual artist in, you know, what we called in the old days a free artist. That means that nobody is asking you to do anything, and both things can be very complicated. Both to accept that somebody is saying what you're supposed to do, and it can certainly also be very hard to decide yourself what's good and what's bad. But as a graphic designer, you always have to deal with other persons about your work. And you know that already. I mean, and that can be very nice because you are in a team. As a visual artist, you very often are not in a team. You probably have to deal with a gallery much later or a museum, or, but otherwise you're just alone. As a graphic designer, you have to work with someone, and that will help you through a lot of loneliness, that's for sure. Is it helpful, what I'm saying?
Maybe later. Yeah. Oh, I had a question for you when I sit here. You use a lot of naked and strange figures. Why?
First of all, it's a very classical discipline in visual art, in fact, to show the naked body. But at the same time, it's not to show the naked body, first of all. It's simply to take away all those things that we use to hide. Because clothes and hairstyle and all the things that we are surrounded by is, in fact, to cover up or to send a message, who am I? And in fact, if you're walking on the street, that's a very good exercise. You can, in a split second, see who the person passing by you are. You can see this is not a Dutch person. You can see, I can normally always see in Copenhagen, oh, that's a person from Belgium, that's a person from Germany, this is a person from, I mean, and basically we look totally alike. And I don't even know what it is. We basically have the same clothes around the world, and still we see it so quick. We see some signals, and we also see, he looks like an artist. Oh, that looks like an architect. Oh, that looks like... And I don't think that artists is trying to dress like an artist. I don't think architects is trying to dress like architects. I don't think... nobody is trying to do that, but we do it. And you also spot immediately in the clothes, the style, everything. You also spot if a person is doing well or not doing well, if a person is troubled or not troubled. I mean, we see a lot of things in no time. So for me, when doing paintings, for me it's very important to take away the hair, to take away all that clothes that makes us judging them immediately. So they can just stand in a pair of stupid underwears, or that we all know. That's not sending any good images out or messages about who you are. I want us to be naked both mentally and physically. So we are standing there as basic human beings, almost without any kind of dignity, because just underneath the surface, we have got that in common. That if we didn't have the culture around us, we would be at that stage. And art is one of those things that makes us having an identity, and knowledge about having an identity, and knowledge about what is good and bad. Of course, religion does that too, our law system does that too. But in that sense, art is a very important part of bringing us up to another level. Can you imagine us without any music at all? Whoa.
Thank you.
Same to you.
Yes, thank you. And with this portfolio, we're at the end of the masterclass. I want to especially announce Charlotte Bartels also, if you can stand up for a moment. We had another portfolio from her too. For the time, we have to really close at 1, so it's not possible to have this portfolio as well. But thank you again, all of you, to be as brave to present your work here. I hope all of you had a interesting morning. I do hope you had too, Michael.
Always nice to talk with colleagues.
Yeah, exactly. So we're gonna end this masterclass. As you can see, we at the Kunsthal we have a series of masterclasses. The next one, which already is planned, is on 13th September with Victor and Rolf. We have an exhibition with them too. Well, for now, I wish you a very pleasant day. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.